Hey everyone, going to take a little bit of time to go over the lesson on sentence fragments. And here. Okay, so what are sentence fragments? Well, if you think about what the word fragment implies, a fragment means a piece of something, a part of something, but not a whole something, not a complete something. So a sentence fragment is simply a part of a sentence, not a complete sentence. So sentence fragments are essentially incomplete sentences. So you remember back in grade school, we learned sort of the basics of what a sentence requires to be considered complete. And then we learned about other things that we can add into sentences. Because to make a sentence complete, you need a subject and a verb. But that's, 2 words, 3 at the most, probably. We don't want a bunch of writing that consists of 2, 3, maybe 4 word sentences all the way through. Very short and choppy, monotonous, and it's very annoying. So we add other things to our sentences to make them more informative and more interesting. We can add adjectives, adverbs, objects, modifiers, prepositional phrases, right? But at the end of the day, to be considered a complete sentence, you need the subject and the verb. You can have all the adjectives and adverbs and modifiers and prepositional phrases you want, but if you are missing a subject or a verb, what you have is a sentence fragment. Doesn't matter how long it is. It could take up this whole thing right here, right? It could be that long with all the extra stuff you've added in. But if you're missing the subject or you're missing the verb, it's still incomplete. It is still a sentence fragment, right? You have to have your subject and you have to have your verb. And you have to understand that just because a sentence sounds right, or just because a sentence makes sense to you, that doesn't mean that it's correct. You really want to pay attention to what a sentence fragment is so that you can identify them and fix them. Sometimes we end up with a sentence fragment because we have used a subordinating conjunction. You remember learning about those in the useful words lesson. We've used a subordinating conjunction, but forgot to attach that dependent clause to an independent clause. Right? So here's our example. I worry about whether I will get a job, although I am convinced that new opportunities will open up before the end of spring. This probably sounds fine. We certainly understand what's being said, but it is not grammatically correct. The word although is a subordinating conjunction. Using this word has turned this whole sentence into a dependent clause. It now has to be attached to a complete sentence in order to be grammatically correct. So if we don't connect it and we leave it hanging out on its own like this, we have a sentence fragment. It's an error. Obviously, if this is the type of sentence fragment you're dealing with, the easiest way to fix it is to make sure that it is attached to a dependent clause, right? I worry about whether I will get a job, although I am convinced that new opportunities will open up before the end of spring. Just take out that period and lowercase that a. Keep it together. You could switch the order, although if you already have it written this way, there's really no need to flip it, but you could. Although I am convinced that new opportunities will open up before the end of spring, comma, I worry about whether I will get a job. Right? So this was where that lesson on subordinating conjunctions comes in a little handy, is remembering that when you use one of those, you have automatically turned your sentence into a dependent clause that cannot stand on its own. And if you try to let it stand on its own, you end up with a sentence fragment. Right? Another reason we can end up with sentence fragments is by using phrases. Like I said, sometimes a lot of times we want to add extra information to our sentences. It's what we do. We want to provide more information, more support. We want it to be more interesting, more informative. And sometimes we don't think about how we have structured the whole thought. We have an example here. In physical appearance, I look like many teenagers with my brown eyes and black hair. With my brown eyes and black hair. That doesn't have a subject or a verb. And it's just sort of an extra phrase that we tacked on after this initial sentence. But what we really were trying to do was incorporate this phrase into this initial sentence. We just didn't do it the right way, right? With my brown eyes and black hair directly relates to this initial sentence. The reason she looks like many teenagers is because of the brown eyes and black hair. Not sure how that makes sense, but that's what she's trying to say. You can fix this several ways. You could turn this into a sentence, right? In physical appearance, I look like many teenagers. I have brown eyes and black hair. I don't know if it's the most pleasing way to fix it, but at least it is grammatically correct now. We have a complete sentence here, and we have a complete sentence here. You could, and this is probably what you would mostly want to do, is take the phrase and incorporate it into the initial sentence in a location that makes sense and sounds smooth. In physical appearance, with my brown eyes and black hair, I look like many teenagers. And notice how it's set off with commas. We put the phrase in the middle of the sentence, and we have a comma before it and a comma after it. What that implies is we could take this out and still have a sentence. In physical appearance, I look like many teenagers, which is indeed the case. So, phrases. Very common way to end up with a sentence fragment. It is an idea that we have that is directly related to the complete sentence we have typed. But instead of incorporating it into that sentence, we just tacked it on after the fact and left it hanging out there by itself. And we can't do that. It has to be either incorporated into the sentence like it probably should be, or you could create a complete sentence out of that phrase. We also can end up with sentence fragments due to inappropriate verb forms. This is using those gerunds, the ing words. They look like verbs. They are verb forms. They have a verb within them, but they aren't actually verbs. So we have an example here. Politicians fear newspapers, knowing the power of the written word. We don't have a subject or a true verb in this, so it's a fragment. How do we fix it? Well, we could turn it into a complete sentence. Politicians fear newspapers. They know the power of the written word. We could use a subordinating conjunction to combine the whole of the ideas. Politicians fear newspapers because they know the power of the written word. Or we could use this as an introductory phrase, a modifier, and put it at the beginning of the sentence. Knowing the power of the written word, comma, politicians fear newspapers. Any of those corrections is acceptable. It really just depends on what you're writing, the sentences that are coming before this, the sentences that are coming after this. Do you want two shorter sentences? Would you prefer to keep them connected? Do you want to use this modifier at the beginning to sort of change up your sentence patterns, right? But just keep in mind that if you begin a sentence with this type of verb form, a gerund, an ing word, check to make sure that it has not created a sentence fragment. Because if it's like this, it's a fragment. If it's like this, it's okay because it's connected to the complete sentence. All right. There are some practice in here. I'm going to go down to actually where I've answered them. You can look here at these. These are just identifying, is it a fragment or is it a complete sentence? And then we have some examples of groups of sentences with a fragment and how to identify it and correct it. So we have, the city was full of beautiful Gothic buildings that mesmerized the group. We plan to tour this area again next year. This is our sentence fragment that mesmerized the group. We don't have a subject. We don't really have a full verb form here. What does this seem to be connected to? What mesmerized the group? Well, the beautiful Gothic buildings. So it goes with this idea. So why not make it a part of this sentence, right? The city was full of beautiful Gothic buildings that mesmerized the group. All you had to do was take out that period, lowercase the t. That's it. Or the building contractor gave them a bid that they thought was ridiculous. They decided to look for someone else. All right. That has turned it into a dependent clause. It has to be connected in some way. What was ridiculous? The bid. So we want it to be connected to this sentence, right? The building contractor gave them a bid that they thought was ridiculous. They decided to look for someone else. Take a look down here at number 9. My 5-year-old son, Anthony, is built like a little wind-up toy. His black curly hair, bushy eyebrows, a cute button nose, and chubby cheeks, which people can't resist pinching, these make him look like a life-size teddy bear. This is our sentence fragment. It is just a list of physical traits. His black curly hair, bushy eyebrows, a cute button nose, and chubby cheeks, which people can't resist pinching. It's just a list. It's not connected to anything. So what are all of those physical traits referring to? Why are we listing them in the first place? Is it because those explain how he's built like a little wind-up toy? Or did those explain how he looks like a life-size teddy bear. It seems as though that list of physical traits is related to why he looks like a life-size teddy bear. So we'd want to connect that list to this sentence in some way. But this word right here interrupts the flow. And the reason is because we got through this long list and didn't realize that we had a fragment, so we put a period there. Now we know we need to start off with some type of subject moving into this final sentence, so we use the pronoun these. But if we are going to use this list correctly and attach it to the idea it goes with, then we no longer need that pronoun to begin this sentence. So my 5-year-old son, Anthony, is built like a wind-up toy. His black curly hair, bushy eyebrows, cute button nose, and chubby cheeks, which people can't resist pinching, make him look like a life-size teddy bear. Gotta be very careful looking for these errors. Here's a couple more examples that you can look at with the answers provided for you. But that is the sentence fragments. Just be mindful of what they are, how we can often wind up with sentence fragments, and then think about the best, most logical way to fix that error. Just because it's a fragment, meaning it's missing a subject or it's missing a verb, doesn't mean the best way to fix it is to add the subject or the verb. Sometimes the best way to fix that error is to incorporate that information into or with the complete sentence that likely comes before it or right after it. It's more than likely, I would say 98% of the time, when you end up with a sentence fragment, it's because you were either in a train of thought and you put a period and then realized you had more to say, and it ends up as like a phrase or a fragment after the sentence, which means it could easily be incorporated into that sentence. Or, you knew what you were going to say next and you had the phrase, and then for whatever reason you put the period and then the rest of the thought, and then it just needs to be incorporated into that thought instead. So when you hear sentence fragment and you know, okay, sentence fragment, not a complete sentence, probably missing a subject or a verb, well, why don't I just add a subject or a verb? Sometimes you can, but is that always the best option? As you can see, oftentimes, the best option is to simply incorporate that idea into the complete sentence. Right? All right, so you're going to have a homework assignment where the first part of the assignment deals with sentence fragments, and it's going to be very similar to these practice activities here, where you'll have a group of sentences, like this group right here, and one of the sentences is a fragment. You're going to have to identify it, just like I did up here, right? And then fix it. So these exercises here are a very good way to practice for the homework, but keep in mind the homework itself is also practice. All right, so obviously the more you understand this lesson and the more you're looking at these examples and working with them, hopefully the easier the homework will be. But again, the homework is also practice. So if you get to week 3, assignment 1, and you're working on that first section on sentence fragments, and you feel like you're doing a good job, and you get the assignment back graded, and it'll say you got full points for it, but it looks like you struggled, I will go through and tell you which ones you missed and what you need to work on, that sort of thing. But obviously, the more you work with the examples and practice a little bit, the easier the homework will be. And then if you're getting the homework with no issues, you're understanding it and getting the correct answers, the more likely it will be that then you can transfer that knowledge and experience into writing and editing your own paragraph later, right? But it is just practice. Practice here, practice in the homework, all right? But definitely reach out if you're really struggling. Otherwise, you will get my feedback on week 3 assignment 1. All right, guys are free to go ahead and move on to the next thing.